Government is out of excuses for staying out of banking. And the all-out war behind the scenes for Australia's sovereignty. Coming up on this week's episode of the Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report. It's the 21st of March 2024. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined today by Citizens Party researcher Richard Bardon. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks, Robbie.
In this week's episode of the Citizens Report, we're going to be talking about the banking inquiry drama that's been happening around Australia, which has left the government literally with no excuses. And we have to, now that we see what they know how bad it is, then you don't let them off the hook, right? So that's going to be an important part of the discussion. And Richard, the second subject is there is an all-out war. There's lots of dramatic things happening in front of the scenes and behind the scenes. It's relating to this question of where Australia sits in relation to China and the United States. But there's a war in Canberra, and we're going to highlight some of the forces that are trying to pull us back from the brink, and some of the forces that are trying to push us over the brink into, basically being the next Ukraine for the United States in a war on China. Let's get straight into it, because we're going to try and cram a lot into the time we have. Before we begin, remember, help us get this around. The best way you can do that is share the content on social media, subscribe if you're not a subscriber, and when you do, make sure you ring the bell icon for updates. Like the show. Make comments underneath the show, they're very important. Also, donate. Rest assured your donations are not being used to take holidays in Bali or Fiji. I'm sick of travelling, but I'll talk about that more in a minute. Every effort we make, though, to intervene in this situation is incredibly valuable, and you'll see that soon. But we only do it with the support of the Australian people. We're not commentators, we're activists, and we need your help in terms of doing that. Also, I have some things to announce before we get going proper. So there's a couple of things. One, Saturday the 9th of March, we attended this event in Melbourne. When I say we, Richard and I and a bunch of other people from the office here, because the Citizens Party sponsored it, co-sponsored it. We attended an Assange event called Night Falls in the Evening Lands, and it was very, very good. And the presentations, all the speakers were excellent. Those speeches have now been uploaded onto YouTube. So we're going to put the links below where you can access those speeches, and we encourage people to do so. Lots of different perspectives on the issue or the issues that Assange is emblematic of, right? And even though, plenty of the people giving speeches, we don't agree with them on absolutely everything. It's worth uniting around this cause, because it's not just Assange personally, although that is an issue, and the more you learn about Assange, the more you personally, hope we can intervene here. But it's about the reason Assange is being targeted which is what really unites the people that were in that room and the people who support Assange is there's a runaway agenda for permanent war, which can only end in absolute disaster for the world, and we've got to stop it. And Assange has been, and what he's set up with WikiLeaks has been quite key to doing that. Actually, question without notice, Richard, but you were talking about it this morning. Just give people a quick update. There is discussion from the Wall Street Journal about there may be a plea deal being negotiated.
Well, that's what they're saying from the American side, although it sounds like more hopeful from their end that Assange will cop a plea, because...
But you're thinking they're trying to get themselves out of...
It seems that, my reading of it based on the background, what we've seen before, where Assange has turned down opportunities to make deals multiple times. He sat in jail for 5 years and he didn't have to if he just wanted to make a deal.
Yeah.
So, but what the that said, what the Wall Street Journal's saying is that they're talking about downgrading the charges, dropping all the Espionage Act stuff, and just talking about mishandling classified documents, which is a misdemeanor, not a felony. So no long jail terms, no death penalty completely off the table, and would be may even be released with time served because he's been, like I said, in Belmarsh for 5 years. So apparently those discussions are happening with some of his lawyers, of which there are various groups in different countries.
But it's quite extraordinary if what you suspect is true, that this is the Americans trying to save face. They know this is an indefensible position they have. They're trying to extract themselves from it now, but in a way they save face to get him to agree to a misdemeanor, to plead guilty to a misdemeanor. Anyway, that's an interesting development on that front. One of the insights, the best of insights into Assange on the day came from Yanis Varoufakis, who is a friend of Assange, and his speech you can watch by clicking on the link below. All right, and the last thing before we begin proper is the Citizens Party is holding seminars around Victoria. These are for members and activists. These are members and activist forums. They're going to be nationwide, but I just want to talk about the Victorian ones. We know that many viewers of the Citizens Report who participate in our mobilisations would like to have these kind of discussions face to face. So we have 3 upcoming in Victoria. April 14th in southeast Melbourne at Noble Park. April 28th in the northern Melbourne in FAWKNER HADFIELD area. And May 19th in Deer Park on the western side of Melbourne. So the co-founders of the Citizens Party, Craig and Nolan Ishwood, will be there giving presentations. I'll be there and also giving a presentation and helping to have discussions with everybody present. And it's an open forum for people to talk. We've just had 2 of these in Brisbane, which our members who attended enjoyed immensely. Now, these are not open slather events though, so they're invitation only. If you're interested in coming, please call our office on our toll-free number, 1800 636 432, and ask to speak to an organiser about the process to register to come. All right, so that is 1800 636 432. But if you see yourself as an activist, and you should, and if you've participated in our campaigns, you have the capacity to participate in these things, and we really encourage you to do so. So if you haven't attended before, make that call, talk to an organiser, and hopefully we'll see you on the day. All right, running out of time, Richard, let's get into it. Government is out of excuses for staying out of banking. So first, again, we're not quite ready to declare it completely, declare complete victory, but the government's attempt to give away its power to overrule the RBA has been called dead by one of the top economics journalists in Canberra, and this was feedback we got this week from this journalist. So the vibe in Canberra is this attempt is dead. The report for the Senate inquiry into the RBA reforms will be out tomorrow, the 22nd of March, and so we'll be interested to see what's in that report. But we're going to monitor it all the way to the end. You can't, I haven't been on the show for quite a few weeks because I've been travelling. The last time I was on the show, I was talking about how we've got, we're very close to victory on this. But you never count your chickens before they hatch, right? So all the signs are good. And one of the reasons, Richard, we have to follow through all the way through to the end is because Angus Taylor wrote a letter or an article.
Someone wrote with his name on it. Anyway.
And he is trying to have it both ways by the looks of it.
Dangling out the Section 11 repeal thing, which he couldn't even get right about what's in what bill and law and what it does. But dangling that out to Labor is saying, well, maybe we can trade this for the amendments that we want. But anyway, so we'll see what's in there and what's in the main report and the dissenting report and all of that sort of thing. But
well, all he would have achieved with what he wrote today is infuriate his backbench because they are dead set against it. The members of the Senate, the Liberal Party in the Senate, who participated in the inquiry, they were scathing about it. And of course, they've got one of their own modern day heroes in Peter Costello, the longest serving, and they would, by their measure, the most successful treasurer in Australian history, because their measure is surpluses, right? 11 surpluses in a row. Peter Costello was particularly scathing about this thing. So they've got his authority to say this is rubbish. We have to keep this authority over the RBA. Anyway, but there's the reason I wanted to start with that is that's symbolic of the ideology that we've had for too long that both sides have imbibed on, which is that government should not be involved in banking. And we're saying the opposite. Government must be involved in banking, and it's because government has vacated the field that we've got predatory private banks that have been able to run riot at the expense of our economy. Now, so we may have a victory on that, and because we're very close, when I was in Parliament last time, in the last week of February, Glenn Isherwood and I had meetings with members of Parliament all over the building, and we focused on not the RBA overrule power, not the Treasurer's veto power. We focused on parts 2 and 3 of the RBA reforms bill that they want to pass, and part 2 removes section 36 of the Banking Act, which gives the RBA the power to direct the lending policy of the banks, the private banks. And we've talked about this before, that's almost as important as the overrule, because that's the power the RBA could have used. That's one of its many tools. Michelle Bullock keeps lying to the government saying, I only have one tool, which is interest rates. No, section 36 of the Australian Banking Act is another tool, right?
Yeah, they got a whole 300-piece toolkit in the shed, and all they just use is one shifter.
Exactly.
One broken shifter.
One broken one. So we need to keep. So we were educating these senators and members of Parliament on that, and the third section of the RBA reforms bill is about the objectives clauses, because at the moment the RBA Act says that monetary policy has 3 objectives: price stability, full employment, and the economic prosperity and welfare of the people of Australia. And what they were proposing to do is drop the third one out, take that out of being a monetary policy objective and relegate it. They say elevate it, but it's actually relegated to being an overarching objective of the bank itself. But why that's important is the most important decision that the bank makes is on interest rates. And when they're sitting around that table right now, they're obliged, when they make those decisions, to say, is this going to contribute to the economic prosperity and welfare of the people of Australia? And they want to take that out, and we need to make sure that they keep that in. Now, we may not win on that, but it's something we were able to use the opportunity of the meetings to educate politicians about. All right, but like I said, it's emblematic of this ideology that the government doesn't want to be, they were brainwashed. You shouldn't be involved in banking anymore.
If there's one thing we have learned, Mr. Speaker.
Now anyway. Richard then was quoting, in fact, we've probably got a clip we can run of that. I'll test the producer. I think it was March 2009. So a few months after the global financial crisis, that's what the treasurer the shadow treasurer at the time, Joe Hockey, got up in Parliament and bloviated. He said,
and if there have been any lessons learned, Mr. Speaker, over the last 30 years in Australia, it is the government should not be involved in banking.
As if that was the lesson of the global financial crisis. No, free deregulated banking is what we shouldn't have. Anyway, let's not get so distracted in that. Because here's the other thing though, and this is what I want to focus on. Last week I went to Western Australia and I attended the 12th hearing of the bank closures inquiry in Tom Price, and that's what I was complaining about travelling, because it was quite a distance to go. You fly to Perth, I got to stay overnight in Perth, and then I flew up to Paraburdoo, and then drove to Tom Price, and then had to reverse that. I came back on Thursday and did the whole thing in one day. There was no overnight, and by the time I got home, I was pretty stuffed, let me tell you. Now, the hearing, Lisa and Craig covered this last week, but I just want to recap some of it. The hearing was supercharged by the fact that Bankwest had made this announcement that it's going to go fully digital and close all its branches. One thing we've just learned about that is Bankwest and Commonwealth Bank are trying to have it both ways. And what I mean is, when Commonwealth Bank got a lot of good press in the middle of last year by saying we're not going to close any more branches, regional branches, this is a lesson in learning how to pay attention to what banks say. Because Commonwealth Bank, a lot of people just interpreted that as, oh good, Commonwealth Bank's going to stop closing branches. No, Commonwealth Bank said Commonwealth Bank is going to stop closing regional branches, right? So they kept closing metropolitan branches, even though that's just as disruptive, frankly. We only pledged not to close regional branches. And they kept closing Bankwest branches. We only pledged not to close Commonwealth Bank branches, even though Bankwest is a wholly owned subsidiary, right? And this is how bankers think. They create loopholes for themselves to exploit in their favour.
As a London banker, now then House of Lords member, what's his name, Michael Forsyth, said that, and he was a banker. He was a City of London banker. He said they're adept at getting between the wall and the wallpaper.
That's right. So that's an example. But people were nevertheless shocked that Commonwealth Bank kept doing that and closing Bankwest branches. And now in one fell swoop, they've turned around and they said, we're going to close them all. The 15 in regional towns where there's no other banks, they're at least going to rebadge those as Commonwealth Bank branches. But that's 45 banks closed across Western Australia. The rage out there is enormous. So when Bankwest is challenged, well, you say you're going to go fully digital, but your customers don't want to go fully digital. What are you going to do about them? They say, this is what they literally say, they can still bank with us face-to-face through the post office.
No, they don't just say that. They say, we will continue to serve them through the post office.
That's right. We will continue to serve them through the post office. In other words, the taxpayer-funded post office, run by small business people who are on the bones of their arse, frankly, will continue to serve them for us, and we are entitled to sponge off that infrastructure while we keep profiting our massive profits. That's how we're going to do it. Yet, the news that we've just learned is that even though Bankwest was not covered by Commonwealth Bank's pledge to keep branches open, Bankwest doesn't pay to use the post office because it's covered by Commonwealth Bank's payment that it makes to use the post office. And this is the bank having it both ways. So Commonwealth Bank made a deal originally with Christine Holgate to pay to use Bank at Post. Commonwealth Bank's payment also covers Bankwest. So when they want to save money, that covers Bankwest. But when you want to hold them to a pledge not to close regional branches, that doesn't cover Bankwest, right? This is the nature of the beast. It's actually why I did a show with Martin North when I got back last week on Thursday night, and we called it Only a People's Bank Can Tame the Savage Beast, because that is what they are. All right, anyway, the hearing was great. I just want to give some highlights, but some of it's a recap from last week. The Shire of Ashburton is probably the biggest shire in size in Australia. I'm not quite sure that's absolutely true. It's certainly the richest. It's half the size of Victoria, just one shire. The reason it's the richest, the Shire Council's not the richest. The area would be the richest local government area in Australia because this is where our iron ore is mined from. We can put the graph on the screen that we use in the alert service. $147 billion Western Australia made last year from China alone selling iron ore. And they made 36 or something from 36. What have I got? What have we got here? Japan, 36.3 billion from Japan, 18.8 billion from South Korea. So $200 billion WA made selling iron ore, and it comes out of the Shire of Ashburton.
Yep. Right? It's pretty much the only thing propping up the national terms of trade at this point.
No, exactly. So huge shire, massive wealth comes out of it, zero banks. Zero, thanks to the bastardry of the banks. Zero banks. And it creates chaos in this area because of that factor, and people have to drive vast distances to do their banking. Anyway, the Shire of Ashburton has put up the idea, well, we need a public bank. They're proposing that, because I think their proposal, Richard, is based on their cynicism about state governments and federal governments, their local government, their proposal is, well, maybe we local governments should get together and make a public bank. And frankly, it's not the worst idea in the world. It shouldn't have to be that. The federal government should lead on this and create a postal bank. But it shows you need banking services, and this is what they're willing to resort to. And I must say, take a little bit of credit for the Citizens Party. We've had a bit of influence in that shire over the years because one of our staunchest members in Western Australia was actually on the shire for a long time, Lorraine Thomas, and she's been a great supporter of the Citizens Party for many, many years. You know, she's quite elderly now in a nursing home and probably isn't even capable of understanding this anymore. But when I saw what the shire was putting up, we gave a lot of credit to Lorraine Thomas for the contribution she's made in educating them over the years on the importance of this public banking option. All right, there was a volunteer who testified, who was a volunteer at the local softball club. He told in excruciating detail, and this is where I get angry, and I don't like getting angry. I mean, but when I have a bad habit when I talk about things, the anger wells up. It's hard to control, right? But you know, when you hear stories like this, because these banks they pulled out of all these towns and they told the locals go to the post office. So here's an example, and it's absolutely frustrating. When you're a volunteer at a sporting club, you know there's often quite a changeover of positions, and these are all voluntary positions, right? Treasurer, secretary, all this kind of stuff, and you have to have used bank accounts, and you have to have signatures on those bank accounts, and for whatever reason, the banks, and this has happened Australia-wide. This story has come up in all 12 hearings. I kid you not. And they just don't fix it. The banks will not allow the post office banking service, Bank at Post, to update signatures.
Yeah.
They just won't.
Yeah, this is the big four banks specifically. The smaller banks who also use Bank at Post, they're all fine with that.
Of course.
What was his name? Scott Etherington from the Licensed Post Office Group at that hearing in Canberra last year, right? Saying, we already do this for all our other clients. They won't let us do it for their customers. They make them go and do all these things, jump through all these hoops just for reasons that nobody can understand.
They take the bank away, so the next bank is hundreds and hundreds of kilometres away. They say use the post office, but something so trivial, which is just updating a signature, and these are this is true for everybody, but imagine you're the volunteer. This is your time you're giving up to participate in this community organisation, right? So this poor guy describes the hoops he had to go through, and eventually he had to drive the many hours, 5 hours to the next town, to the next bank. It's a minimum $300 out of his pocket to pay for the fuel to do it.
Just to drive there and back, let alone anything.
Because these bastards won't fix something so simple. And it's true for Coober Pedy, it's true for everywhere. It is garbage, utter garbage. And what it proves, like, don't kid yourself. These pinstripe pricks in these bank boardrooms think of their customers and average Australians with utter contempt. Utter contempt. And don't sell the post offices short. They are authorised by the government to do the most important identity check you'll ever do, which is for your passport. That's the most important one you'll ever have.
Yep.
They can do that. The banks won't let them do something that would make it so convenient for the locals.
Driver's licenses too. All the things that you use the ID that you use to get pass any other ID check, they do it. It's ridiculous.
Anyway, it's worth highlighting though because there's a consistency that the senators have been hit with, and I'll come back to that in a minute. There was a really great lady, Aboriginal representative. She gave excellent testimony. And I told her that at the end, and she was, you know, everyone gets nervous testifying before a Senate inquiry or whatever, but she was just rattling off case after case of the disruption for the Indigenous communities around there caused by this, and she paused, and the chairman Senator Matt Canavan, interrupted her to ask a follow-up question, and she answered that, and there was a bit of a pause, and he says, he says, sorry to interrupt you, have you got any more? And she goes, I got lots more. and she just rattled off a whole bunch more. And it's so disruptive, it's not funny. There's a there's 26% of Australians who are not digitally included, according to the Digital Inclusion Index, not digitally included, and that includes the elderly, the disabled, and the Indigenous communities, right? They need, especially them, the certainty of face-to-face banking and the special assistance they can get from face-to-face banking. And here's a question we've been asking all year, Richard. It's a national commitment to, we call it closing the gap. Everyone acknowledges there's a massive problem with disadvantage, and it shows up in Aboriginal life expectancy and all that sort of thing. And so the commitment is close the gap. There's an annual close the gap report produced every year, etc. Why are the richest, most privileged, entitled businesses in Australia exempt from closing the gap? Because remember, they're not losing money. These are profitable branches they're shutting. They're not losing money. They're not losing money as overall businesses. They've never made more money. And they're being allowed to do this. Anyway, moving on, there was the local post office licensee gave excellent testimony to the inquiry. And there was this great section. There's 3 senators in front of him. We'll put a picture up of the actual hearing itself. There's 3 senators in front of him. And he just mentioned in passing how once the local Westpac left Tom Price last year, his traffic at his post office has skyrocketed. And Slade Brockman looks a little bit like me, though he's more bald. He looks up like this, he goes, so that means people do use banks.
Bank branches.
Yes, it does. It proves it. This is the truth. The banks are saying, oh, no one's using our branches. When they leave, the post office says, everyone's using us. These are the people who used to use the bank, right? These banks are liars. And it was a little bit of an epiphany for Senator Slade Brockman. And then, of course, Bank West participated. Now, they didn't fly up to Paraburdoo like me. They got to do it over the phone. However, Matt Canavan, the chairman, they were so pathetic. They were so contemptuous while trying to pretend to be caring. You know, you would either yell at them or ignore them. Anyway, he found a third way to deal with them, which was he turned into a prosecutor. It was like a courtroom drama in one of the best that you've ever seen. He just drilled down. He took their answers at face value and said, okay, you've said you consulted. What does that mean? Did you get a report? What did it say? Etc. And because every answer they gave was actually fluff. They were using words that were meaningless. He says, especially the word consultation, Senator Canavan said, when you use the word consultation, it's a corruption of the English language. You do not mean consultation, because they don't. They did not do any consultation at all, but they still use these words. And so he hung them he gave them the rope and they hung themselves. And it was really good to see it, and I was quite impressed. But back to what I was saying earlier about the consistency. There's been 12 hearings in 12 months. The theme is universal. The bank said, we're closing down these branches because nobody's using them because everyone's going digital. That which, W-I-T-C-H, and I will lead the protest in front of the Banking Association and apply the which. Everyone got in trouble for calling Julia Gillard that. This woman is a cut above because she didn't go around Australia justifying branch closures. She went around Australia cheering branch closures. We had her on radio all over the place in January and February last year, cheering branch closures. Australians are embracing digital technology, she said. This is absolutely wonderful. And when the only time she's appeared before this inquiry, she was so contemptuous of the process. It was a Labor senator, the late Linda White, may she rest in peace, she died last month. It was the Labor senator who took her on and stripped her bare and showed the world how utterly morally bankrupt this woman is. She was saying, everyone's loving digital technology. Banks are not abandoning towns. They're giving them new options. And it was all these crap talking points. Yet this inquiry has gone to 12 hearings in a row, and all they've heard back from the communities is the devastation caused by the loss of those branches. The clear proof that the banks and the Banking Association, Anna Bligh, have lied through their teeth. So the question is, Richard, not what's Anna Bligh going to do, or Matt Comyn going to do, or Peter King going to do, and the other bank CEOs. What are the senators going to do? Because it's the moment of truth. They have participated in a legitimate exercise of government where here's the problem, we'll look at it in an inquiry, here's the claims made by the banks, let's listen to the communities. Oh, the communities are clearly massively affected in the way the banks have lied about. Now what are they going to do? And that's what we have to zero in on now. There's going to be 2 more hearings, one next Monday in Canberra I'm going up for, and then there's the final hearings in Bribie Island on the 16th of April. And if you're in the local area, get along to it. You can call in and find out. We'll have we don't know where the venue is yet, but once that's available, you can get along to that. But then the report will come out. And the question is, will these politicians, we know some of these politicians on this inquiry want to go the whole hog. The late Linda White, the only representative of the government on the inquiry, everything she talked about in her line of questioning, and some of her questioning was the best, was about re-regulation, which itself is a big deal for the banks. She's not there anymore because she passed away, sadly. But what are these National Party and Liberal Party politicians who dominate this inquiry going to do? Remember, they were in government for 9 years before 2022, when the banks were running rampant, and they did nothing. Now they're trying to get your vote, my vote, etc. They're trying to look like they're electable again. They're trying to be popular. They're trying to give all the right signals. Are they going to do this exercise just to look like they're being tough on the banks, or are they going to follow through and demand something that goes against their own crap ideology that they've embraced for the last 30 years, right? That government shouldn't be involved in banking. Is that what they're going to do? And this is going to be the question, and we have to hold them to account on that question in a big way. Now, what do we know has to be done? The postal bank, right? And everybody's talking about this. When the Bank West announcement was made, I was called onto 6PR in Perth. I was asked about the postal bank. Angus Taylor was on 6PR. He was asked about the postal bank. David Littleproud was on 6PR. He was asked about the postal bank. And we're going to play a clip now of everyone's talking about the postal bank, right? A public bank, a people's bank to address this. We want to play this clip now of Senator Malcolm Roberts on ABC TV last week doing a segment on cash where he talks about the solution is the people's bank as a postal bank.
Now, the use of less and less cash by Australians appears to be a choice made freely by consumers, but the problem is it's having side effects right down the line, all the way to the authorised secure trucks that transport cash from where it's printed to the big 4 banks that buy it from the Reserve Bank of Australia. Armaguard is the one and only operator left in that market, and it's in deep financial trouble with this side of its business. That's become a headache for the big 4 banks, but also for some remote country towns, which are finding it hard to even get their hands on cash in some cases. One Nation Senator Malcolm Roberts has been keeping an eye on the cash drought for quite a while now. He joined us here in the studio a little earlier. Malcolm Roberts, welcome back to Afternoon Briefing. It's been a while, so we're glad you can join us. I know through monitoring committees and other aspects of the Parliament here, you've been monitoring the decline of cash and its repercussions for quite some time. Thought we might focus today on some reporting about the possible decline of not one, but both cash in transit firms. These are the ones that officially transport it around the country. Armaguard is under financial stress. What happens if they go under?
Well, then banks need to find a way to move the cash. And what I think is going on, Greg, is that, well, first of all, Armaguard is owned by Lindsay Fox, who also owns other trucking businesses and also airlines. And he's very close to Anthony Albanese, who was at his birthday party recently. So I think there's some questions that need to be asked about that. But what's happening is that Armaguard did a deal with the Competition Consumer Commission just 4 months ago, saying they promised if they were amalgamated, they would stay afloat for quite some time.
As a monopoly. As a monopoly.
Yep. And 4 months later, they're talking about shutting up shop. So that causes problems for the movement of cash, and the banks want to get the taxpayers on the hook.
All right, so who would or should pick up the tab? If Armaguard are struggling here, is it a government subsidy to them? Is it a renegotiated rate of payment from the big four banks? How does their financial predicament right now be alleviated?
There are competitors to Armaguard, and one of them is Commander Security. It's a small firm that can move cash around, but the banks refuse to deal with them. And the banks, I think, are even talking about debanking Commander Security. They're trying to wipe out competition. The other thing to remember, Greg, is you've taken a surprisingly strong stance for the banks. The banks have a social licence to fulfil. The banks operate in banking, and they must provide legal tender. That's a fundamental to banking. If you're in banking, provide legal tender. And so what we're seeing is the banks trying to drive out cash, and they shut 2,000 branches in the last 6 years, and they've shut 700 ATMs in the last 12 months. What they're trying to do is drive out cash so that you have to use the bank digital transfers, which means you incur fees, which they're missing at the moment, and also they miss your data. They want your data to build profiles about you.
Sure. So in some country towns where bank branches are already thin or non-existent on the ground, I believe Australia Post has been playing a bit of a de facto role as a bank, flying in cash, in some cases at their own expense, just to keep a town ticking over with cash. If we're thinking laterally about solutions here, could Australia Post come into play with a funded obligation to be, I suppose, the bank of last resort in a country town?
Definitely. The Australia Post licensed post offices are actually providing those services now, many banking services now, and they're doing it for fees that some of the banks won't disclose, others will disclose. So we would like to go beyond that and see a people's bank, because the original Commonwealth Bank, before it was privatised in 1995, was back in 1910 when it was formed by the Fisher Labor government. It provided a vital service. It put our country on its feet, and it provided enormous competition to the globalist banks that own our big four banks. And so what we need now is that same kind of competition from a people's bank, and the post office is one form of people's bank that could be extended not just to a post office with banking services, but to a proper bank.
Yeah, and should they be funded? Because under their obligations at the moment, Australia Post are in effect funded to do certain things, but not the transportation of cash.
I think if they're providing a service, they need to be compensated for that service. They need to be funded, and cash is a vital service. The availability of cash is vital because it provides competition, it provides choice, it provides freedom to escape the tyranny of the major banks.
And as you've asked questions of different agencies in various committees on this over time, are you satisfied that they are focusing their attention on what looks like a pretty tight squeeze right now on Armaguard? We're in an urgent state of resolution, aren't we?
Yes, I think there's an underlying premise to your question too, Greg, and that is that cash is dying. It's not dying. It has declined until the recent years, but we still have 30 million cash transactions for withdrawal of cash at the moment. A lot of people need cash. The Reserve Bank itself did a survey recently that said 1 in 4 older Australians can't handle the internet. They must have cash. We also have $100 billion in cash in the economy. And so cash is here to stay. And what we've seen is, I've been on a committee to inquire into the closure of bank branches in rural towns. And what we're seeing is a deliberate push. It is deliberate, Greg, to shut down bank branches and to shut down ATMs, to drive people towards cash. So it's people, the decline in cash until recently, when there's been an uptick in cash, the decline has been driven by the banks for their own short-term and long-term money.
So you're saying this isn't entirely market-led by we, the customers. It's actually being driven by them. But that's irreversible, isn't it, this trend towards bank closures? Only last week in Western Australia, Bankwest converted itself as a subsidiary of the Commonwealth Bank of Australia into virtually a digital-only bank. And we've had people on this program, Malcolm, suggest to us that that is a bit of a test bed for where others will certainly follow. I
think the banks will try to do whatever they can to minimise their costs and to maximise their revenue. But we must remember that banking is an essential service. Banks should not be controlling it. At the moment, so what we need is banks that provide a service and fulfil their social licence. They have an obligation to satisfy customers all over the country, and that's what we need. And if they can't do it, then let's have a People's Bank, like the Commonwealth Bank used to be.
All right, well, we'll leave you to keep an eye on all things related to cash, gold and the like, Malcolm Roberts, in your work as a senator. And thank you once again for joining us today on this emerging story around Armaguard. Thanks so much.
You're welcome, Greg. Pleasure to be here.
All right, so I can assure you everyone's talking about this as an option, right? This is the solution. This is the bank's worst nightmare. Make them compete with a public bank on service. Now, what can we do about it? Well, apart from what we have been doing, we need to start getting people to call their local federal members, especially in marginal seats, because we're in the 12 months before an election, and the more you call the members of parliament in marginal seats, the more that gets noticed by the party leadership, because they want to either keep those marginal seats they've got or win them back. These are the seats that change hands in an election, right? They want to keep them or win them back. Make that call, send that email, pester these people. We need a public postal bank. We need a people's bank.
And especially in WA, where Bankwest has just done the campaign in this favour.
Yep.
Because that's where Albanese won the election.
He almost swept the state, right? They're going to be desperate to keep those seats. If you're in WA, this is a very important priority for you. Okay. Richard, let's move on, because so we don't run out of time. The all-out war behind the scenes for Australia's sovereignty. Now, I was going to give a history lesson. I'm going to jump. We'll just jump over that for now, because we are running out of time. One of the things that's happening, the regular viewers of this show know we've been reporting on this China question big time. We are now in the position where, since Albanese got elected, he said we're going to stabilise the relationship. China wants to stabilise the relationship. So this week, the Chinese Foreign Minister, Wang Yi, became the highest ranking official to visit Australia since the last time he visited, I believe, was it? Yeah, so was that 2017, 2018, something like that, right?
Thereabouts.
So that's before everything went crazy. And you can either choose to believe what the media says, tells you that you should be really afraid and suspicious of the Chinese and all that kind of stuff, but know that the people that are doing that are the people that have normalised the talk of war. If you don't want to be in a war of annihilation with China, it is actually quite, and a war of annihilation, it would be our annihilation. Mm-hmm. This is crucial that these sort of developments actually happen. So he's here, and that's good. Behind the scenes, though, what you're seeing is the massive pressure being brought to bear on the Albanese government to keep toeing the lines with the United States. Richard, you wrote an article this week because ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which helped instigate most of this stuff, they are pulling out all stops at the moment to try and do their best to absolutely derail the little bit of progress that's been made. And Paul Keating has been calling that whole anti-China crowd out. But what you've written about is how shameless this is. Now, we've talked about ASPI as an American foreign interference operation.
A US cell, Keating called it.
A US cell, but it's not just US, is it? It's not quite equally British, but almost equally British. And in this particular case, the latest clown to take up a job there looks like an actual British agent.
Yeah. So they've imported this, and this happened right around the same time as the AUKUS thing was finalised, right? Late in 2022, with all the stuff with the, Albanese announces the big submarine deal and all of this stuff and all this money. That's a big chunk of it's going to Britain, to the shipyards there.
Probably the biggest chunk's going to Britain.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think they've published an actual breakdown because a lot of it's so far out in the, past the forward estimates, as they call it.
And it's BAE Systems,
BAE
right?
Systems runs that shipyard.
Which we identified in the year leading up to this AUKUS announcement. BAE Systems increased its donations to ASPI by a massive amount.
And so they've imported this British guy straight out of the British Foreign and Commonwealth, or Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, whatever they call it now, whatever development means to them, building war machines or getting paid to build them and then not building them in some cases. And he's going around, our neighbours, our allies, this and that, we need to do this, we Australians. And he's straight off the boat or plane, however they send him out here now, from the British Foreign Office. And his whole resume, such as you can find online, because he looks a relatively young man, 40 or under, around there. But he's had 10 years experience in the Foreign Office with diplomatic postings with, human rights in China and strategic affairs in Japan and all of these things. It's like, he might as well have MI6 stamped on his forehead.
Yeah.
And so this
We
guy's...
thought that, and I've actually consulted with other people who, without me prompting them, have said the same thing.
Yeah, and so they send this guy to Canberra, to the British Commission in Canberra, and then he seems to have just parachuted pretty much off the top of that building into Aspie next door, so to speak. It's not actually next door. To push the British line and to push the Albanese government to push the British Labor Party to toe the line. Because there's these tiny nuanced differences in their rhetoric, even though he acknowledges that their actual policy is the same, like Morrison and Albanese. Their policy in terms of militarising Australia and militarising the world and recreating the Cold War at best, and maybe nuclear war, it's all the same mechanically. But it seems to me that they're so frightened of any of this stuff, people voting for, like they did here, voting for a Labor government, expecting something different, and then demanding it, and the government caving in. And they're worried about that happening in Britain as well. So,
and this is how the game works. So there's very little difference between the UK Tories and the Labor Party on this. But because there's a change of government and a bit of a difference, how do they lock AUKUS in to the British Labor government? They've got to get the Australian Labor government to look like we're demanding it, even though we are the ones giving them all the money, and it'd be better if we scrap the whole thing, right? And so they've sent a British guy over here to use through Aspie, put pressure on our Labor government to keep the potential new government of the UK locked in. That's how you get continuity in these policies, regardless of democracy, right? That's one of the scams they pulled. The other thing this guy did is he wrote this article saying, pretty openly, why we actually need to attack China, openly. Like when we talk about this stuff, we need to be naming China. What was his reasoning?
Well, his article, multiple times through this whole article, we need to justify higher defence spending. In the Cold War, the Hawke Labor government, said they increased spending to a higher proportion of national income than what it is now, because of the threat of the Soviet Union, which didn't exist then either for us, right? They made it up then too. And so every time, 4 or 5 times in this 2,000-word article, less, increased defence spending. Well, okay, Aspie's sponsored by the military-industrial complex from Britain, the United States and Europe, on top of its Defence Department funding. Now, the Defence Department is allergic to democratic accountability. It has a fit every time anybody even suggests it. You can go and look at the stuff about their, should the Parliament get to debate going to war? Hell no, says the Defence Department. And by the way, I found a submission that Aspie, or it was this guy Bristow, not long after he came there, and a couple of the other usual suspects from Aspie, and then they get to go and testify to the Parliament about this and spin their line, and no dissenting voices are invited. And all this stuff about, no, that would be a very bad idea. That would upset the national security policy and freak out our allies and all of this. Who are our allies? It's Britain and the United States, the ones who are robbing us blind for imaginary submarines while they turn us into the front line for World War III, that they're the only idiots who want it. China doesn't want it.
And in the meantime, their sponsors, these big weapons manufacturers, he's just saying, we've got to name China as the boogeyman so that they can make more money. Now, look, we're highlighting the fact this guy is a Brit because, as we said, this is a fight for Australia's sovereignty, right? What is Australia ever going to assert an independent foreign policy? The other hysteria this week, which we're going to play a clip on, well, it was last week, but people have probably heard about the TikTok flap in America. We've discussed this before. Richard's given some in previous episodes. The whole thing is a massive beat up. But they want to try and get the same debate going in Australia, right, as in America. So 60 Minutes, the 60 Minutes spin-off by Liz Hayes called Under Investigation, did a 1-hour show on Chinese spying in Australia as if, and they made it clear this is Xi Jinping personally doing this.
Yeah.
He wants to spy on every single Australian like they've got nothing better to do.
Yeah, like Dr. Evil in the, Has he got a Siamese cat? I don't know.
Dr. Evil, and the other one, the earlier one was it Fu Manchu or whatever?
Oh, I don't know.
They, as if, like, but you've got to ask yourself, there's 1.4 billion people plus in China. They got their hands full governing their own population. They are not interested in Joe Blogs on Sydney Road, Coburg. They're just not. But 60 Minutes did this whole episode and want to make you believe they were. Anyway, they made all sorts of claims, but we want to play a clip now because this is where it gets quite nasty. So pay attention to this clip because this is where they're claiming that the Chinese, as part of their operation, they're interfering in Australian political debates. Now, they talk about the voice debate, but have a look at the bottom of the screen as we play this clip and just look at whose face you can see at the bottom of the screen.
Incendiary posts from fake social media accounts linked to China and potentially created by AI, seeking to create suspicion and division, was seen in last year's Voice to Parliament debate.
Today I announce that referendum day will be the 14th of October.
At the time, national security expert Dr. Alex Capels and her team at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute discovered China was actively infiltrating social media, using misinformation to influence and engineer chaos during the Voice referendum.
There's a range of kind of hostile activity that social engineering can beget.
I've seen him somewhere before.
That's my election shot. They don't explain it. Why is my face on this 60 Minutes episode? They don't explain it. Well, we know why, because last year ASPI claimed that China is interfering in the Voice debate, China is amplifying the things that Paul Keating says, and China is interfering against the Australian banks by supporting the campaign against bank closures in regional Australia. Now, the conclusion, you can draw a few conclusions from that. If you're smart, you'll draw the conclusion that these people are just utter liars. Like, clearly, seriously, what would China even be caring? But if they're not, if you choose to believe they're not liars, well, go back to the first part of this show, and you have ASPI, the great China hater, saying that Xi Jinping cares more about your regional town's functionality than the Australian government does. Maybe we should invite China to come in and take over, for crying out loud. I mean, anyway, it's a ludicrous thing to say, but it's the kind of nasty lies ASPI comes up with, and partly because they hate us so much. And they hate us so much because we've been going after them, well, this guy especially, for nearly probably a decade now, and we're the only organisation that's gone after them fearlessly.
Yeah. Hey, maybe the Shire of Ashburton could invite the Bank of China to open a branch.
There you go. There you go. I mean, look, it's just, but this is the kind of hysteria they pull. Now, however, there's another side to this. And the other side, we're seeing certain signs. We are not the greatest fans of the Albanese-Wong administration, especially this guy. You should listen to him every morning, brief us on the latest crap they do. But we are part of the scenery here pushing to pressure this system to not get signed up to an American war. And when we see signs of progress, it's actually quite good. So a few weeks ago, one of those signs of progress that we saw was the ASPI freaking out that the Albanese government has announced a review of Commonwealth funding of national security think tanks. And there's more than 50 of these around Australia. Most of them are sort of like university departments and all that kind of stuff. But there's also dedicated institutions like ASPI. Yeah. And despite there being so many, ASPI's convinced this is targeted at them, and we think it might be targeted at them.
And it was nice of all their little pet journos to out themselves by freaking out on ASPI's behalf.
That's true. You could tell who their friends are. That's an interesting development. Even more interesting, Richard, is the news that broke this week that Sky News is flipping out over, which is that Albanese has removed from the National Security Committee of the Cabinet the head of ASIO and the head of ASIS, who have been sitting on the National Security Committee of the Cabinet.
Sitting in on every meeting.
Now, ASIO and ASIS are the Five Eyes agencies. In other words, they're part of the partnership that is dominated by the CIA and MI6. Scott Morrison, in the same action where he was making himself secretly the most powerful Prime Minister Australia's ever had, with all these secret ministries.
Six secret ministerial appointments to himself. Or
he did
whatever it
this
was.
enormous power grab. He also stacked the cabinet, which is supposed to be elected officials who are ministers, right? That's what the cabinet is. He was stacking it with unelected people, including the head of ASIO and ASIS, and the cabinet secretary under him was this guy Andrew Shearer, who's someone else Paul Keating's gone after.
He's now the head of the Peak Intelligence Agency in
Office
the
of
Prime
National
Minister's
Intelligence.
Department, ONI, yeah.
Yeah, but he was the secretary of the cabinet. Unelected people who represent the American strategic interests in Australia were on the cabinet, and Albanese has now removed them from the cabinet.
American and British strategic interest, especially in the case of ASIS and ASIO, both of which were set up on the basis of lies by the British in the 1940s, which we might get into one other day. But they're freaking, like you said, they're talking about this as though it was something set in stone, that it always, some grand tradition that Albanese's upsetting, when it was just some stupid thing that Scott Morrison did that had never happened before, and there's no reason for it to happen unless you're in an actual war and you need those guys face to face every day.
But Richard, it happened in the context of this drastic turn in our foreign policy, where we went from everyone happy that we had this good trade relationship with China to suddenly everyone on the Liberal side, it seemed, baying for blood, right? And in that context, Scott Morrison did this. I mean, I'm calling it a soft coup that happened under Scott Morrison. Now, look, we're nearly out of time. I just want to, one last thing. We put out a release about this. People can look at it on our website. But this is the West Australian last Tuesday. Liberal hopefuls' novel take on China. One of the Liberals who has led the attacks on China is Andrew Hastie, the former SAS guy. He's one of these Wolverines, these pro-American Wolverines in Parliament. This article is about him and Tony Abbott are trying to stack in the seat of Tangney in Western Australia another former SAS guy named Mark Wales, who's written a fictional book about set in 2034 about China invading Australia and a former SAS guy leading the fight back, i.e. him. So this is the China haters trying to stack the parliament with more China haters through the pre-selection process, right? So we put out a press release calling that out. You can look at that on our website. Anyway, this is just a glimpse of the battles behind the scenes. What's at stake here is Australia's sovereignty and our survival as a nation if we don't avoid this war. But we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks to the viewer for participating. Remember to click on those links below for the various things that we've announced. Stay tuned for more of the Citizens Report in coming weeks.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.